The nice thing about operating in this dual use space, it really does significantly increase the market size. But the back and forth nature of being able to talk with everybody from different corporate venture partners to other dual use firms. There's a number that have stood up to even some of the large, and very successful generalist funds.
Hello and welcome to Machine Minds. I'm your host, Greg Tarusian, founder of Samson Rose, your robotics talent search partner. And on today's episode, I'm joined by Nick Snoad, Vice President at Marlinspike. Thanks for being on the show today, Nick.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Let's jump into it. So, I wanted to rewind. I usually do this, get a little background from our guests so our listeners know who they're listening to on the show and where your insights and experience kind of come from. So I wanted to rewind. And what was your path from West Point and Army operations, which is very unique kind of foundation career-wise, into the VC world? For the people who don't know, Marlinspike is a early-stage venture capital firm.
Yeah, so I went to West Point, graduated in 2013, spent 5 years in the Army, was an Army Signal Corps officer, which is the communications branch within the U.S. Army. So did a lot of SATCOM, HF, and other radio and internet technologies. And so spent most of my time in Europe, but was working pretty closely over there with different NATO partners and U.S. units from 2014 on. So saw kind of the first, origins of the Russia-Ukraine conflict that we see today. And then, I decided to get out in 2018 and move back to the U.S., my wife and I, and settle in the DC area. And so I found my way over to a consulting firm where I was very fortunate to embed within a massive private equity fund and be a part of their portfolio operations team. So worked with companies on a lot of different EBITDA levers, so everything from supply chain, real estate, healthcare, you name it, it's probably a part of a thesis there. And so it was a really interesting experience to come out of the Army. And I knew, as I was thinking about what I wanted to do long-term for my career was investing, getting exposure to that world seems pretty interesting. But ultimately, where was I most passionate about? And so I found Marlinspike right as we were standing up the fund in 2022, and a really interesting opportunity to come on board here and, work with companies that are supporting both the national interests and really trying to disrupt the global economy. So, found my way and we've been at it for 3 years, and it's been a ton of fun.
That's awesome. That's awesome. You mentioned your experience consulting and then on the PE side as well. So how do you think that experience helped prepare you for now this role, evaluating startups, tech deals, and investing?
Yeah, so it's a couple things I would say. So the Army actually was very useful, I would say, for evaluating the technology side. I was not necessarily a technical background. I did go to West Point and had to take some engineering courses and things like that. But really being in a very technical branch and being a leader within a technical branch, you have to very quickly understand the key factors of the systems that you're working on, the variables that are the most important to make them successful or fail. And then taking that into private equity and working on the operational side there, you really understand, okay, well, what are the nuts and bolts that are going to make a business actually function? It may not be the most exciting thing, but, your employees have to have healthcare. We have to go find an office. We have to, get office supplies, a lot of random things like that. And so I think it was a really interesting way to be able to take that kind of technical experience within the Army, working in the technical branch, gain business experience, and really understand how companies actually run in the day-to-day, and tie all of that together. And then, when Marlinspike stood up, it was like, okay, let's go do this.
Awesome. And then you also went back for your MBA, right? So what was the goal at that point in your career?
Yeah, I did. So I went back in 2020 to 2022. So pretty interesting time frame there in the middle of COVID. Was able to keep working during it, kind of made the most of an interesting situation. With a lot of classes being remote and virtual. And what I really was trying to get out of it was, okay, you've got Army operational experience, planning, leading teams, running missions. You've got, call it, business operations experience, seeing how different portfolio companies across the multitude of industries run. Let's go codify a lot of that into, formal education and business knowledge with an MBA. And so it was a great experience. I have nothing but great things to say about Darden and the time and the people there. So was really fortunate to be able to do that as well.
Great. That's great. Very well-rounded, unique background, it sounds like, for the investing space and evaluating the type of technologies and stuff that you guys work in, which leads me on to Marlinspike, which is great. And anyone that's been a long-time listener of the show might remember we had Mislav from Marlinspike on a while back. Really cool episode. Definitely go back and listen to that one as well for his perspectives. But for those who don't know and aren't aware, what makes Marlinspike different from traditional VCs, or even you guys are more like, defense, dual tech kind of focused fund? How do you differentiate yourself in that space?
Yeah. So, there's been a ton of capital that has moved into that ecosystem. Obviously, I think it's probably the hottest kind of sector out there right now, behind anything with .ai after it. What I would say that we as a team really take a lot of pride in what we call this, value add or private equity approach to venture capital. Obviously, we're not writing as big a checks as some of the generalist funds, but I think the team's collected experience in the public sector, understanding both, building and seeing how companies can grow and operate within that field. And then really helping companies go after the innovation ecosystem. So if it's spending time with them on how do we think about going after the Hill, if it's spending time down in Austin at the Army Applications Lab, or how do we look at DIU, how do we partner with an incl or the intelligence community side, and really helping them build and refine that strategy and trying to add a ton of value. And I think a lot of our portfolio companies, that's probably what we're most proud of on the investment side, is the work that we put in after the fact. It truly is a long-term partnership with these companies.
That's great. And I touched on that defense focus, but dual use technologies as well. So what does that really mean in through your investment lens? And then if you were looking at deals or looking at companies, is it more defense first, or is it more commercial traction first, more important? Where do you guys sit on that?
Yeah, so I think the second part I'll start with, really when we're looking at companies, it's very, very sector dependent. I think, so generally we look at anything from aerospace, which can all be all the way up in space, to cybersecurity. Reality is some of these markets are driven way more than others by government spending and innovation. Like space today is still very much, I think, a government-centric business. Cybersecurity, on the other hand, the regulatory barriers and authorities to operate on a government network can be incredibly tedious and time-consuming. So I would encourage a lot of cyber companies, go start with commercial first, build, refine your product, prove product market fit, and then go chase after, maybe the more complex case within the U.S. government. So very, very dependent. Ultimately, though, why we say dual use and why that's so important to us is it really does significantly increase the market size. And ultimately, like, venture is a bet on massive markets and huge disruption within those markets. So if you can build a product that can go after a $200 million program or $500 million program or $1 billion program within DoD, that's great, even if you only capture a little bit of it. But that's not necessarily enough to drive a venture scale return. So that's why, like, finding these technologies and platforms that can be used across different markets really does lead to the outcomes that we're looking for.
That makes sense. Okay, cool. And what stage do you guys usually invest at? And what are some of the, well, first, let me ask that. What stage are you normally investing?
Yeah, so we are a multi-stage fund. The majority of our capital is going to go into pre-seed and seed stage company, or pre-seed through Series A. I would say we're going to spend a lot more time with those types of companies, but we will be opportunistic, looking for later stage, N of one companies to both de-risk the portfolio and also provide exposure potentially into a unique outcome, like we were in Anduril in the first fund that we did, and that's while late stage that we got in, but I think that company is really, really doing incredibly well.
Awesome. And what are some of the signals that you guys look for in startups operating in the space? Because you do stuff in aerospace and autonomy, AI, defense, energy. There's multiple use cases or tech that you look for, right? So
yeah,
are there certain things?
Yeah, so it's very different depending on stage. At the earlier stages, I think the biggest thing we are looking for is tech that is truly, call it consequential. Like, I'm not looking for necessarily a cybersecurity product or capability that is 20% better than CrowdStrike. There's just not necessarily a moat there in terms of the timing that product is going to take to scale. Like CrowdStrike will probably have evolved and adapted. So I think we're looking for, early stage, really focusing on the tech, and then probably most importantly though is the market. Like ultimately, do we believe that this is a multi-billion-dollar problem that needs to be solved? Because if we can't get there on the market in particular, like you can build great tech and you can build a successful company, but it may not be venture backable. As you're going up the stack into later stage, then it really becomes a lot more about execution, pipeline. How is this company growing? Is it being able to expand beyond just its current market and into 2 or 3 other peripheral markets? Is it expanding its, call it, platform of products and the product portfolio? It becomes more about, I think, tactical operation and then scaling.
Let me ask you something, because you kind of just triggered something for me, and it's a conversation I've had a few times recently about that. Obviously, there's more activity. Excuse me. More activity, more funding happening at that earlier stage, right? It doesn't seem to be as difficult to get a pre-seed seed round of investment if you have, good team, good product, big enough market, etc. But going to the later rounds post Series A, right, B, C, D, we're seeing fewer and fewer of those, especially in these spaces. But you made a good point. Like, you're looking at different signals at the different stage. So what's your view or perspective on that early stage when it's very much could be more focused on R&D, or even if it's like moonshot ideas where you're saying, hey, this isn't another cybersecurity play, this is something that doesn't exist right now. How do you guys, whether you or with investing partners, view those like much longer term plays that are probably a lot more capital intensive, and founders that aren't at like that commercial level yet to really talk about like whether it's unit economics or actual their BD function or whatever it is?
Yeah, I think at the earlier stage, the biggest thing we are looking for is, call it pre-seed, seed. You're gonna raise capital for call it 12, 18, 24 months. And I like to really focus on what is that sprint going to accomplish. Is it, you're going to have a prototype? Is it you're going to put a demonstration on orbit? Is it we're going to go for X number of deployments of this software across an enterprise? And do we think that is enough to signal to the market that I've reached, call it product market fit or tech viability, and really drilling down around that. That's where I spend the most amount of my time, I would say, doing due diligence with the earlier stage companies. Does that answer kind of the question there you're looking for?
Yeah, kind of. I think what I'm taking away from that is you are looking to unlock further capital or go past certain stages. You need to hit clear milestones for this initial investment. Yeah. Because some of these, sometimes I talk to founders and they're like, well, we don't necessarily have a market, we're creating it, but in parallel we're creating the technology. I'm like, that's in this current market is a bit of a slippery slope for an investment, because everyone is pushing, when are you going to start generating revenue, and who the competitors are if they're
and I do think though the nice thing about operating in this dual use space, you can't, especially on the, maybe this is more of the question you were looking for, is how do we think about being able to de-risk some of that in terms of the revenue, product market fit? I mean, and that's really going on. Really is a great partner, through the innovation ecosystems that they put together with different grant dollars, SBIRs. We don't need to go down that rabbit hole, but the different things they have available that are milestones along the way, that are non-dilutive forms of capital, and can help you reach tech viability, product capability demonstrations, et cetera. And so that's where I think the value add that we bring is, okay, you're going to take on some risk capital by equity from us. How do we then find, the non-dilutive form to help you accelerate, that also can help push the product to where it needs to get to in terms of market viability?
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Okay, very cool.
And then I think, one of the things you and I've talked about before is like what types of founders are, most successful in that environment.
Yeah,
I think there's a healthy, push-pull relationship there, because ultimately, like, the government's incentives may not be the company's incentives and where the company ultimately needs to get to. And we've seen this before sometimes where, maybe the Air Force or the Navy or a service branch has a request, and you think, okay, that looks like it could be applicable to what I need to do. It's somewhere on my product roadmap, and I'm going to accomplish this and get the innovation dollars. But in reality, all it's done is maybe made you short circuit 3 or 4 other steps that you needed to accomplish before that milestone was actually important. And then you ultimately don't necessarily end up in a successful outcome. So the founder that is able to very, acutely balance those competing demands, and I would say relentless pursuit along that product roadmap, to where you can prove viability and execute is really key. Because the government will give you a lot of dollars, will give you a lot of, potential opportunities there. But you just have to have the discipline to know, is this actually going to be for the best interest of the long term of the company?
yeah, yeah. That's good points. Good insight as well for what you guys are looking for. Are there certain domains that you're particularly bullish on right now? Whether it's autonomy, robotics, cyber, AI, ML.
Yeah, so there's a couple that I think we're pretty excited about. Number one, actually, and we haven't done an investment in the space yet, but I think we're very interested in energy and potentially the changing regulatory environment around nuclear power. I think there's some really interesting opportunities there, maybe in geothermal. I've seen some interesting tech in that space as well. So I think energy is really, really interesting. And probably where we'll spend some time later this year. The other thing, I think, kind of these factories of the future, and hrien, has obviously been out there for a number of years and is doing, I think, very, very well. But I think more technology solutions and technology companies that are going to build that way, like data-enabled end-to-end manufacturing, the tying everything from product development to production, all together under a common operating system. I think that's the type of solutions and companies that we're going to be spending a lot more time looking at, within particular, whether it's aerospace or automotive or the other types of sectors.
That's good. Interesting. Yeah, and I guess that it aligns very well with the incentives in the country at the moment, too, with bringing manufacturing back and trying to do more onshore than offshore.
Absolutely.
Yeah. How do you assess highly technical teams where the product isn't always intuitive to non-experts?
Yeah. Good question.
Yeah.
So I think,
I was gonna say, from my side, it's when I talk to founders doing like intakes to try and help them hire, and we talk through talk to me about the unique selling points or how you guys are different and all that. It's like very tech focused, and it can get lost in the communication when you're trying to think about a broader picture of appealing to people.
yeah. So a couple things. One, obviously, some level of technical research and knowledge has to be done. I think, drawing back to my own experiences, again, being in the Army and in a very technical branch with not necessarily a core background in that field before starting it, you have to get smart on some fundamental level about the technology. Now, at the end of the day, if you're solving nuclear power, it's not necessarily my job to be the one that figures out how to split the atom. But understanding how you're going to do it and how you're going to build a plan to do it, that's what's most important there. I think once you have that core, call it fundamental understanding, what I love about venture capital in general relative to other classes of finance is the, call it, very collegial atmosphere that we have. It's a very collaborative environment. I think and our incentives are often the same as some of the corporate guys out there who have resources. So folks like maybe a Raytheon or a Lockheed, or working closely with partners like that across the ecosystem, or the government itself, right? Like, the government does have a number of experts in end users across these organizations. So getting their feedback is incredibly important as well. And so working across the team, to develop a baseline understanding, and then again going out to the ecosystem of other funders and other companies, other founders, other funders is a really important part of it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Trying to get as many data points, really.
Yeah.
As much insight as you can.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Is there an area in national security where you think tech adoption has just been way too slow?
Yeah. And this is an area we are spending a lot of time in right now. I actually think if you look at where the future of, the DoD is going, it's going to be moving towards heavily autonomous forces. There probably always will be a role for, humans on the loop. But ultimately you're seeing the impacts of drones in Ukraine, and just a way that it has accelerated much, much faster, I think, than anybody thought. And so, where I think DoD and national security is going to move to is like wargaming. Wargaming across DoD generally used to be more of an archaic tabletop kind of exercise. The reality, I think, in the future is that war games are going to be basically training autonomous algorithms. And so, the TTPs is what we call them, techniques, tactics, and procedures for operations will become autonomy algorithms. And so building kind of the simulation environment for a lot of that, I think, is really, really interesting, and something where I think DoD, maybe they'll lean in. How fast it goes, I'm not sure, but that's an area that we are very, very interested in seeing.
I haven't heard that before. Yeah. So when you're saying it's an archaic thing, what I think of is like Game of Thrones type, where they're looking at all the kingdoms, and is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, exactly. And ultimately, if in the future, all of these autonomous systems are going to be out there and employed in mass, like that simulation architecture to be able to rapidly refresh, missions and data coming back from the edge to then retrain the algorithm to make adjustments to the TTPs, which are now, again, autonomy algorithms. And so that's something I think we're very, very interested in seeing what happens here in the next, call it 3, 5, 10 years across the DoD. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, that is very interesting. So you obviously you led teams in the army, you managed complex ops, things like that. You went to the consulting world. Do you find yourself gravitating more towards founders with ops backgrounds or more of the technical roots?
Yeah, I think, and what I love about the team that we've brought together here at Marlinspike, I mean, Mislav, former aerospace engineer, Chip, Walter, spent over 28 years in the Navy, and then ultimately spent a number of years at the agency. So a lot of different, call it, lenses to look at the problem. Where I gravitate and enjoy probably the most time is understanding the technical founder's vision and background, but how are they actually going to build and put that plan into action? Like, what are all the different key variables that go into it? What are, call it, the technical milestones we have to hit? But more importantly, or just as importantly, what are, call it, the operational levers we have to put in place to actually make it happen? Okay, I need to go hire 3 engineers to make it happen. Okay, what's the talent profile to do that? Where do we need to take down space to go find the talent? Like, all those, kind of micro decisions that ultimately feed the macro. I really enjoy going deep with our potential different companies that we're going to invest in throughout our diligence process on that. It's a lot of fun.
Awesome. Is there something that, from moving into the venture capital world, that you didn't expect before you actually entered the space?
Yeah, I think what I actually alluded to earlier, just how collegial the space really is. I mean, yes, there's some competition, obviously, over certain deals. Cap tables and getting into a round can get crowded for great tech, and because great tech and great people are ultimately going to get funded. But the back and forth nature of being able to talk with everybody from different corporate venture partners to other dual use firms. There's a number that have stood up to even some of the large, and very successful generalist funds. I really, really appreciate just the different perspectives that you can get from all of these different types of investors. And so that was eye opening, because I think, in the big PE world, it's a lot more, winner take all. And so I do enjoy that about venture capital, getting to work with all these different stakeholders.
Yeah. That is got to be more interesting than being out on your island by yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Let's talk about broadly more building for national impact. I'm curious to get your opinion on some things. So what role do you think that VCs like yourselves, like Marlinspike, play in shaping the future of American industrial and defense capabilities?
Yeah, I think you're going to find more and more of the private sector driving a lot of this innovation. I think the government has recognized that technology is just too complex for them to manage it all internally themselves. I think the rise of these innovation cells that now foster innovation within the service, but rely heavily on private capital to make investment decisions and potential winners. Like, I think that's ultimately where the future is going to go more and more. So you've seen organizations like DIU, the Office of Strategic Capital, different service branch components, standing up innovation cells. That's going to be the future, and continue to be, I think, a big part of our, at least our strategy is tying closely to what those partners are looking for as we evaluate companies. Because I think, the biggest advantage America has is one of its biggest advantages is its financial markets, and the ability of our country to have the firms that we do investing in the space, I think is something the government has recognized as a critical advantage and is looking to leverage that.
Yeah, makes sense. What do you think needs to change in terms of policy or capital allocation or even culture to better support companies and founders like you guys go after the dual use tech space?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think we're actually starting to see it. The ability to buy product at scale faster. I think the DoD and the U.S. government in general has done a great job with things like SBIRs to incentivize innovation. But what you've seen is it wasn't necessarily leading to call it capability transfer and scaling within timeframes. And so there was this whole the valley of death, and there's a lot of literature out there on that. Don't necessarily need to rehash that here. What you're seeing now is the ability through things that call like OTAs, TACFIs and STRATFIs and those other vehicles, where now companies who prove a differentiated capability are able to get product into those organizations at a much, much higher scale, much, much faster. And I think that's a great thing. I think continuing to lean into those types of programs is going to be the future, ideally where this continues to go.
Love that. And how do you guys define success for Marlinspike over the next, let's say, 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, so I think for us, we want to continue to obviously invest in, call it, our core sectors that we're in today. But I think we will definitely consider expanding our mandate for sure. I think maybe our first foray here into power, but hopefully we do something there this year. I think is a starting point. I think for us, will we look at multiple types of funds and looking at different asset classes potentially. But really for us, I think expanding, because more and more the national interest is becoming further and further intertwined across all sectors. And so I think that's going to really open up our mandate. And so the next 5 to 10 years, I think are going to be a ton of fun for us as we think about scaling into, different use cases that we, when we were a merry band of 4 or 5 getting started here, probably never thought we'd get to do.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. I wanted to go into a quick fire round, but before that, I realized I wasn't going to ask, but silly of me, I should ask about talent, because that's obviously where I focus my time 90% of the time. I'm curious on your thoughts of founding teams. Obviously, founders, we talked about the types of founders that operate well and like dual use and just the types of technologies that you guys look at. But when you're assessing an investment, depending on the stage, how do you look at and assess the existing team? And then to follow on to that, the ability of the founders or early leaders to actually assemble a great team.
Yeah, so and it's certainly easier in some cases than others, right? Like if you've got an incredible individual who was a prior CEO or has a proven track record, like ideally that's that's the holy grail, call it, right? You've got a multi-exit founder, coming out of one of the premier companies like a SpaceX or a Palantir or somebody in our space. Like that's kind of the easy button.
Yeah.
At some points, right? Like
Bring their team with them.
Bring their team with them, and so that's obviously a network that we closely monitor. I think a big part of our assessment, though, is not just the technical vision, not just the market, but really going deep with the founder and call it the 3 or 4 key individuals that they put together around them on that operational plan, and what's the level of maturity around that operational plan. And with that, you kind of find, okay, have they surrounded themselves with brilliant technical founders, but maybe individuals who have not necessarily run a business before? Have they, or do you have a lot of operators, but they don't necessarily have a great plan to productize the tech in a way that's going to sell? And so how do you balance all of that? That's where I think, having the whole team take a look at it, because I have my biases, Mislav has his biases, Chip has his biases, but getting that holistic perspective around what the team is constructed. I tend to look for, though, I would say the more well-rounded teams than necessarily just core technicians.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's a tough one, right? It is a tough one when you're looking at, especially in the early days, thinking about how this is going to pan out. And to your point, if they're serial founders or leaders, much easier to assess that or get third-party references on what they're like as a leader, how they've built teams previously, and would people actually follow them and things like that. But for first-time founders or early in their career founders, it's always a hard one to assess.
Yeah, and it's in again, back to it being a very, call it, collegial atmosphere. It is a small world, and generally, our ecosystem is maybe smaller than others, and so having that network of other investors to say, hey, how did this, in your experience, it looks like you guys invested in them, go around, how did this individual perform, contribute, what were strengths, what were weaknesses, and I think what I am always on the lookout for with founders is kind of 2 things, and the initial calls is one, we generally ask, what can we deliver for you? Because ultimately this is a 10-year plus partnership in some cases. And if the answer is just capital, then, probably not necessarily the maturity that we're looking for. Because ultimately, we want hungry founders who want to leverage the investors that they're bringing to the table. I think that's something for sure that we are very, very cognizant of.
That's good feedback as well. Yeah, because there's obviously certain investors out there that just want to be a check, right?
Yeah,
we want to do is provide capital.
And the second part of that too is, sometimes, you can do an early stage investment. And the CEO, CTO, even the founder may not necessarily be the CEO who is going to take that thing from series, call it B, through series D. And founders who recognize, call it, their own, limitations and strengths and limitations, right? Because technical execution is probably the most important part from series, call it seed through A. But beyond that, it's getting more into scaling up sales and things like that sometimes. And so founders who have that maturity of, okay, where should I take this? Where am I the guy to go all the way, or should I step aside at this point? That's sometimes a conversation we'll have as well, as part of our diligence.
Awesome. Yeah, that's good stuff. Good stuff. All right, let's move on to this quick fire round before we wrap up. Your time in the army or doing an MBA during COVID and working, which was more intense?
Definitely the Army. I mean, just the everyday challenges of leading teams in complex, changing environments. Yeah, definitely the Army.
Yeah, I could have guessed that actually. And most overhyped buzzword in defense tech?
Probably drone.
Yeah.
Well, I love, where I think the future of the force is going. Being a single threaded capability, I think, can be really tough. And that's why I think we're looking more for enabling technologies that can scale across multiple platforms. So yeah, drone.
Nice. Is there, or what's one startup space that you think is underrated?
Simulations. So we're talking a little bit about the wargaming piece, but another area, I think, call it advances in compute and AI and what that's going to do for physics-based modeling. I think in particular for think like CFD, finite element analysis, those types of technologies, I think, are going to have a massive impact on complexity and also speed and throughput then in terms of product development and design.
That's a good one. Yeah, that's a great one. What's your dream portfolio company or founder profile? You can choose.
Ooh, dream portfolio company. I think Velio Space is really interesting. So I think technology solutions out in that field, I think could be consequential in the next, call it 5-10 years. I think that's a really interesting play. Yeah, I'll go with that.
Okay, cool. That's it for the rapid round. But before we actually wrap the show, is there any advice that you would give founders or vets who want to break into the VC or even the commercial national security technology space?
Yeah. So, if you're coming straight out of the service, I found it incredibly beneficial to go work before just going straight to business school. I think a lot of that's, the natural path is, okay, I'm getting out, I'm going to go straight into school, and then I'm going to go on to my next career. I actually found it really beneficial to go, learn about the private sector because I had zero experience of I couldn't have told you what P&L was when I was getting out of the Army. And so to go and gain that, call it base building or fundamental understanding, was really, really helpful. And so for NatSec in particular, I think going into like the time that we are at right now truly is I call it an inflection point for national security technologies. I would say get out, go join a startup in the space, learn about how it is to work at an early stage company that's trying to sell into the government, leverage the advantages you have as a vet coming out to add value in that space. And then ultimately, the best way to become a venture capitalist, I think, is to build a company and successfully exit it. And so, who knows where that path to take you.
Yeah, good advice. All right. Well, look, thank you so much for your time and insights and for sharing everything, Nick. I really appreciate it. And I really enjoyed this conversation. So thank you.
Greg, really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. Where can our listeners find you, follow you and Marlinspike and see what you guys are up to?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn. So if anyone wants to reach out to me there, send me a message and I will gladly respond and set up some time. And then we do actually have a company Substack as well that we publish pretty regularly on.
Cool. Okay, we'll link those in the show notes so people can find them easily. But yeah, Nick, thank you again. This was awesome, and let's keep in touch.
Yeah, thank you so much, Greg. Really appreciate it.
Pleasure.